Emilio@refed.org, or you can just put it in the chat because she'll be monitoring that as well. And with that, let's jump in. Welcome to today's webinar, Household Food Waste, New Research on Why There's So Much. We always say that food waste is a system-wide problem, and it is, but a large portion of the food that goes uneaten happens at the consumer level within our homes, all 330 million of us, in little bits here and there. And in fact, ReFed's latest analysis shows that up to 48% of all of the food waste pie is coming from households. I will admit it, I do this myself as much as I work on this every day. My kids come home with uneaten carrots and whatnot, and I do struggle to minimize waste in my kitchen. It's a regular occurrence. And while there's a lot that businesses and others can be doing to cut waste in their own operations, for us to really address food waste at scale, we need to find solutions that can help consumers waste less in their homes. And to do that, we need to know why so much is being wasted in homes, which is why I'm so excited about today's discussion. I will be joined by two panelists, but first, let me just introduce myself. My name is Dana Gunders, and I'm the Executive Director of ReFed. For those of you not familiar with ReFed, we are a US-based nonprofit working to catalyze the food system toward evidence-based action to stop wasting food, which is why we get so excited when there is new evidence. And the ultimate goal of our work is to increase the adoption of food waste solutions. One way that we do that is through webinars like this, where we share data and insights that can help inform the work that you all are doing out there. We've got some exciting webinars planned for 2024, so be on the lookout for announcements about them. And we also have the 2024 ReFed Food Waste Solutions Summit coming up this year too. I know it seems like we were just telling you about the 2023 summit in St. Louis, and trust me, it feels that way for us too. But we're so excited to welcome you all to Baltimore this year, the Charm City, as they call it. The summit will be June 11th through 13th. The 11th is field trips, and you don't want to miss those. And it will be really exciting. If you've been to one of our summits before, you know we've got a mix of programming from main stage and breakout panels, keynotes and happy hours and networking sessions, field trips, film screenings, trivia challenges, no-host dinners, and more. And the important thing for you to know today is that the early bird ticket prices, they end on Friday. So you have 2 more days to get a ticket at the lowest ticket price. So if you're planning on coming, you may as well do it now. We'll put the summit registration link in the chat for you, and we will see you in Baltimore. All right, so now let's get back to today's webinar. I'm joined by 2 researchers from MITRE, which is working to address the most complex whole-of-nation challenges. They do this through public-private partnerships, federally funded R&D centers, and an independent R&D program. And they work across government and in partnership with industry, academia, and other research organizations to tackle challenges to the safety, stability, and well-being of our nation. So it'll be, I'm sure you're interested to hear how food waste fits into all of that. So first, let's welcome our 2 panelists. We have Dr. Balca Alaybek. She is the lead organizational psychologist at the MITRE Corporation, where her research focuses on decision-making, organizational behavior, and public health. And in those areas, she's developed tools and designed measurement approaches to assess cognitive, affective, and behavioral variables at all sorts of different levels of analysis. And at MITRE, Balca works with several federal agencies. She's one of the principal investigators for the Food Waste Solutions Project. And this project was funded by MITRE's Independent Research and Development Program. We also have John Aitken. John is a senior social scientist at MITRE. His research applies a multi-level lens to problems related to human behavior, performance, and well-being across multiple timeframes and levels of analysis. He has expertise in quantitative and qualitative data analysis, in survey design and measurement, and field experimentation. And he serves as the data analyst for the Food Waste Solutions Project here. So welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. To get us started, I'm going to hand things over to you for a few minutes to share some of the high-level takeaways from the research, and then we'll get into the discussion. So Balca, over to you.
Thank you, Dana. Let me share my screen. Can you see a blank screen?
We can see it, and you just need to go into slideshow mode, I think.
Yes, I will start the slideshow. Can you see the slide now?
Yeah, but we're in a strange note view.
Let's stop. And again.
Maybe whatever view you had it in when we were just practicing. Someone says switch displays.
Yeah, slideshow. Play from start. How is it now? Fixed?
Nope, we're
No.
still just seeing.
Okay, let's end show and let's
try the presenter view.
I'm doing the same thing as I did when we were practicing. So I don't know what's happening. Let's do it again. Share. Slideshow. From current slide.
There we go. That looks
okay. Thank you. Thank you for your patience and good afternoon, everyone. John and I are excited to share our work with you all. As Dana mentioned, MITRE works with government agencies and engages in partnerships with industry, academia, and other research organizations to address complex whole-of-nation as well as global problems. Our food waste project is a great example of these partnerships. Our MITRE team started a research partnership with Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic and ReFed 2 years ago when we examined the relationships between United States state food waste policies and waste outcomes. Through that research, we understood that we needed direct estimates of household food waste at the state level. Last year, we expanded the partnership to collaborate with Gallup, Brian Rowe, and Brownlee from Ohio State University, Natural Resources Defense Council, and World Wildlife Fund, in addition to Harvard Law School and ReFed. And the goal was to establish a baseline estimate of household food waste, and again, with state-level estimates. We also shared our research plans and progress with EPA, FDA, USDA, and received great feedback, and this happened since the beginning of the project, and more recently we've been collaborating with RAP. In 2023, again, we began with the measurement focus. The data and the findings of the study are publicly available online, and we've been highlighted in several media outlets. Now we are shifting to behavioral change and actually reducing household food waste amounts. But let's start by how we did it. So we conducted a nationally representative survey to measure US household food waste amounts, attitudes, and behaviors. Additionally, we developed a measurement app to pilot a novel approach to directly measure food waste among a subset of survey respondents. This slide is an overview of the participants. We had over 9,000 respondents from the Gallup panel. Again, these respondents provided their food waste amounts over the past week, in addition to answering questions on their food waste behaviors, knowledge, intentions, and demographics. Then we used the food waste tracker app. We piloted the app with a subset of the participants. We had 257 participants, 114 of which provided only a volume estimation in terms of cups and tablespoons. And 143 participants used a Bluetooth scale that communicated with the app. So in addition to the volume estimates, we were able to measure their actual food waste amounts in grams. The survey topics, again, included the food waste amounts in terms of categories and groups. So we had 2 levels of granularity. Behaviors such as shopping behaviors and home food waste management behaviors, such as like, do they freeze or do they eat out a lot or do they use their leftovers? And then consumption behaviors, how did they interpret the date labels? Did they pay attention to date labels when they were buying or wasting food? And then attitudes and intentions, we wanted to understand whether the participants recognize food waste as an important national issue. When it comes to food, what were their concerns and their general beliefs about the food waste as a problem. We also measured knowledge around food waste and government policies around food waste. And again, we had some information already from the Gallup panel available to us, like age and gender, but we also asked questions about their household size and shopping, cooking role in the household. As for the app, the MITRE Food Waste Tracker app is designed to track edible and inedible food waste at the household level. We collect data about both the food item, like where it came from, the condition it's in, and details about the food type, as well as where, why, and how the food was disposed. Core to our analysis here is the estimate of the quantity of food wasted. Again, this was the focus in the survey, as well as the app data collection. And again, those using the Bluetooth-enabled kitchen scale also provided the weight in terms of grams. The app had a pretty simple user interface, and there were these "what does that mean" buttons for the users to expand to get further details in case they didn't know what they saw on the screen meant. After the study ended, we launched a version 2 of the app with some additional features. The app is currently available via Google and Apple stores. It's free for anyone to use, and it can be customized for research purposes. Of note here, this colorful picture that you see provides a visual summary of the waste that people wasted. This was not available during the original initial data collection because we didn't want participants to see this immediate feedback and adjust their behaviors. But now it is available, and we're hoping that this visualization can actually serve as an intervention in and of itself by showing people how much and what they are wasting. Now I'm going to give it to John.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go over at a high level some of our findings pertaining to how much food was wasted and some of the factors we found is really important. And we'll dig into more details later. But in general, so again, we sampled around 9,000 people. It's a nationally representative sample, asking people to estimate how much food they threw out over a week. The average amount came to 6.2 cups. Extended to the whole year, that's 322 cups per year. And to take that volume measure and make it a little bit more tangible, that's like throwing out 360 takeout containers each year. And again, in terms of amount, this is excluding inedible scraps. If you include edible scraps in the estimate, it comes to 8.8 cups per week. So a lot of food being thrown out by most households. Very few people said that they did not throw out any food over the week. So this is kind of capturing the amount being generated. But we also wanted to look at factors that might explain which households are going to be wasting more versus less. So the first factor we looked at, you can go to the next slide, is leftover usage. So basically, we found that households that use their leftovers more efficiently, so taking their leftovers and using them in other meals, actually eating their leftovers and not just throwing them away, more efficiently using your leftovers was one of the big factors we found in terms of explaining how much food is being wasted. Households that were more efficient in using their leftovers generally wasted less food. So leftover usage was one factor that we found that was important. Another factor was date label behavior. So on this next slide, we found that individuals who just looked at the date on a piece of food and threw it out if it was past the date, or who were very, very sensitive to those dates, those individuals tended to be wasting a lot more food. Those households where date labels kind of governed wasting behavior, potentially more so than like using your senses, those households were wasting a lot of food. So the two factors that really came out were leftover usage and date label behavior. We looked at other ones as well. And a third one we looked at was shopping lists. So most everybody used a shopping list. Again, this is a sample of 9,000 people, 76% said that they do use a shopping list. But only 16% of those individuals actually stuck to that shopping list all the time. And sticking to the shopping list was one of the factors that influenced how much food is being wasted in the household. So these three factors were some of the ones we just wanted to highlight as kind of the kinds of things we were interested in, not only estimating how much food waste was being produced, but what might explain those the amounts of food being thrown out. So if you go to the next slide, we also just wanted to acknowledge that this research was, there were many contributions from many people. This was a big collaborative effort, both from our partners and many other individuals. So we just wanted to thank all these people and acknowledge their really important help in this work. Yeah, so that's it for the overview of the research, and I will give it back to Dana.
Thank you, John. And I will say that's it, but that's not it. So if if you have a chance to get into the report and really see, there's a lot of other interesting details in there as well for those food waste behavior geeks out there, and we'll dive into some of them here. There's a question as to where the report's located, so maybe somebody can put that in the chat eventually. And yeah, so let's start just with the overall finding, John, about how do this 6.2 cups, 8.8 cups per week, how do those estimates compare with other studies that are out there? Are you finding it to be more or less the same, or should be taken away? There's a lot more, a lot less from this study.
So in terms of comparisons, we haven't exactly looked at how this number compares to others. But in general, the data is there in case anyone is interested in that question. But there's generally, so when we're looking at the household level, that number, the 6.2 cups, that was generated through asking people before the survey, hey, pay attention to your food and how much you're wasting, so that you can give us a pretty accurate estimate. And then at the end of the week, they reported how much they threw out. So a lot of that, the eventual number being produced by that kind of method, we think is going to generally characterize how much food is being thrown out. But because we're asking people to remember and there's biases introduced through that could result in a number that isn't precisely accurate. And that's also why we had included the app as well, to look at, well, if you ask people to actually weigh their food, what's the comparison there? And we found that there was overlap, but not precisely. The number we found that people were producing through the kind of recall method was generally lower than the number that they were like weighing the food. But again, either method is going to help you determine which household is wasting more or less. But that's the kind of comparison that we were focusing on here, were the data that we were collecting in these two different methods.
Got it. So it's more about kind of a relative, like some of the takeaways
Exactly.
are relative for the people in the study rather than trying to compare it with other studies. Though it
Yeah,
sounds like you
precisely.
did find some under-reporting, which is kind of what we've called it in the past, which generally in previous studies has been somewhere around 40%, that when people are just kind of, you know, filling out a survey that they're under-reporting their waste. So yeah. And what about, before we go too far into the findings, I'm curious, Balca, how did the setup of this study, like how was it different at all than previous studies? Like what aspects of it did you feel like were additive to what had already been done out there, or maybe different?
First of all, we collaborated with the many great researchers in the field, so our work built on their great work. But the differences were the sample size. To our knowledge, this is the first study with over 9,000 participants and a probability sample. We really wanted to get at that state level estimates so that we can capture variability across the states and actually see, for example, go back to our original analysis and see the impact of the state level food waste policies on the outcomes in addition to our other goals. And then the food waste tracker app, the addition of the app to the survey and the ability to kind of triangulate, because within the food waste app, we had the volume estimate as well as grams estimate. So we were able to correlate those two measures with the survey response.
That makes sense. Speaking of the app, I was going to ask you this later, but while we're on it, I know I was really excited to see that. And I'm just curious. Well, I will say when I saw it, one of the hopes in my world is I have a Girl Scout. And so one of the things I keep thinking about is, could I have a Girl Scout badge where they have to like use the app for a week and then kind of report back or something. I've actually heard there is a Boy Scout badge out there. So if anyone knows more about that, please get in touch. I'm dying to know. But my question for you is kind of, was this app just for the study, or what's the vision for it moving forward?
Initially, yes, the app was only for the study. That's why we didn't include some features like entering a zero food waste amount. We wanted, because people waste, and we wanted them to really weigh their waste. And then we didn't include the visual summary, because we knew from motivation research, a visual summary at the end of a day could serve as an immediate feedback for people to change their behavior. We wanted to capture their regular food waste amounts instead of seeing a behavior change during the study itself. But now the app is available for the public. Anyone can use it. We would love to collaborate with researchers, practitioners. We would love to continue the conversation on how the app can be customized to serve different research purposes. But it's out there, and it's not only for our study participants. And if you go to the Google and Apple stores and type MITRE food waste tracker, it pops up.
That's fantastic.
Mhm.
I'm really excited about that as a kind of a new tool in the toolkit here. So that's great to hear. All right, let's go back to some of the findings. So this was meant to be kind of relative, what can we learn about different types of households? So, John, what did we learn about different types of households? What did you learn from a demographic perspective? Are there some that are wasting more, some less?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of the factors that we looked at, for example, the largest factor that we were kind of looking at in terms of demographics was household size. The idea being that if you have a larger household, it's going to be producing more food waste. And that is one finding that we did have. Larger households when you get to about a household size of about 3 or more, the waste estimate jumps from around 6 to around 7.5 or so. So larger households are wasting more, but when you go past a household size of like 3 or so, to like 5 or 6 or more, there's not a huge amount of difference there. So larger households definitely, maybe more than 2. That's one demographic that we looked at. Another demographic we were looking at was income. And they're generally households that had larger incomes in the higher income brackets are also producing more food waste, and the same is true for education. Individuals who were reported themselves as having more education were also reported that their households were producing more food waste. So those are 3 demographics we looked at. We also did look at age was another one. We found that there was a correlation between age and food waste. So older respondents typically reported there being, I believe it was less food waste. Yeah, so those are some of the demographics we were looking at. If that kind of provides some sense.
Yeah, no, I've seen, I think that the conclusion on age has been found in other studies. The household size one I find fascinating. That kind of jumps up at 3, and then I think it goes up and it even goes down a little bit once you get to like 6. I think that's, I don't know, some kids eating other kids' leftovers, or maybe it's like roommates raiding their other roommates' food. I don't know. But the income one, I was particularly interested by because that's actually different, a little bit different than what some other studies have found. So I'll just point that out for people that in some previous surveys and whatnot studies, we've actually found that at least when you factor in per capita, and I know that's different here because we're talking about household, but when you do it per capita, that actually it's relatively similar despite income level. Did you see that per capita, or did you see the same trends per capita?
So in terms of, our kind of operationalization of food waste focused on just household food waste. So we didn't look at per capita as a different estimate, as a different way to think about waste itself, but we did want to take these demographic factors into account, again, like especially with household size, but income as well, education, these ones that I'm mentioning. So what we did take those factors into account because we wanted to see, okay, if you're looking past demographics, does anything else really matter? Does it really matter if you're using leftovers efficiently or not when you have a huge household versus a small one, when income is much higher, education is much higher? And we did find that specifically, not everything came out as like still important, but after accounting for these demographics, we still found that leftover usage was a major factor, that date label behavior was a major factor, that different concerns about food as well were major factors, specifically about like the concern over like, will this food get me sick? Those kinds of factors all continued to account for more or less food being wasted. So while those demographics definitely do set certain households apart, at least in the way that we were looking at it, they didn't tell the whole story. But again, there's tons of different ways to slice this pie. And you can definitely look at per capita. And again, the data is available and we would, explore away. But that was how at least we were reading those kinds of factors.
I see.
If
Got
that
it.
makes sense.
Yeah. And just while we're on this topic, I see a question here about education and someone saying, well, if it's higher education, if people with higher education waste more, does that mean that education on this topic doesn't help? But I would guess that it's a different kind. One is if you have a master's in whatever, that doesn't mean you're necessarily paying attention to your food management habits at home. So I would wager that they're different types of education. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think a big factor here too is the data that we're looking at. This is all correlational stuff, and so it's not that you making more money or attaining higher education means that you will start producing more waste. it could be more complicated than like that. And I think one finding that exemplifies that is, for example, we found that individuals who are more concerned about the impact of food waste on the environment, that there was actually a positive correlation with food waste. So those individuals also reported wasting more food. And so does that mean that being concerned for the environment means that you actually waste more food? Maybe, but another explanation could be that you're just more sensitive to how much food is being wasted and you can report that estimate a little bit more accurately. But so it's basically, what I'm saying is this data, these are the trends we're seeing, and this is where there is always a need for more investigation into why this happens and how it happens, that looks at things over time and different kinds of designs and stuff like that. But yeah, so just a general kind of note on some of these trends we're seeing and what they might mean or might not mean.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It's an imperfect science, right? And there's so many, it's a complex system, how we manage our food and so many factors. So I think that's where having more studies and, having this one it's just helpful because it helps reinforce when you have multiple studies done in different ways, done with different populations at different times, and they find similar things, the more we have of that, I think the better we feel. While you were on
Exactly.
attitudes, kind of what did you hear about attitudes, right? And were there other, you mentioned, people who care more about the environment actually show more waste. Were there other places where people with a certain leaning or certain attitude had more or less waste?
Yeah, so generally, we wanted to look at what people cared about in this like space, and because there's a lot of different things to care about. So looking at, for example, what some of the largest motivators were for reducing food waste. One of the largest we found, and just generally across a lot of different attitudes, the largest thing people were interested in was saving money. And their concern was about, making sure that was the financial aspect of food waste. When you throw out food, that's potentially food that you purchased and didn't actually use or didn't use to the fullest potential or whatever. And so it represents money being thrown away. So people's financial concern about that aspect of food waste, that was a major factor that we found, that I think about 82% of the sample reported that as being a major motivator. And in terms of all the other concerns, the environmental impact, people were generally much less likely to endorse that as a concern across when there were other concerns in play. So for example, like saving money, that was a major concern. Making sure that their food was healthy, that their diet was healthy, was another major concern. And so in terms of the kinds of attitudes people were demonstrating, concern for the environment typically tended to be on the lower side of what people were reporting. Yeah, one of the largest things people were caring about, at least in this study, and I think makes a lot of sense to us, is saving money and the financial impact of food waste, especially on their own homes.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of smirking because I've been watching various surveys ask a similar question for over a decade, and a decade ago you would find that when you ask people why do you feel bad, what feels badly about throwing food out, 80% of them would say money, 50% would say somebody else could have eaten that food or some kind of mentality around that, and 20% of them would say environment. And when I looked at this survey, I found it interesting. It was still right about there, around 80 for the financial part, around 50-ish for the social part, but the environmental part was actually 40 as opposed to the 20 that I've seen in the past. So I don't know if that's progress or not, if those are the people who are actually showing more waste, but it was an interesting conclusion that I saw.
Definitely.
Let's talk for a minute, because I know a lot of people on this call really want to know, well, like, what are the behaviors, if you want to take this issue on, what are the behaviors we're trying to drive? And I think from my perspective, one of the places the study was really additive was in quantifying, like actually putting numbers to the reduction in waste for households that are practicing some of the behaviors that we've been promoting for a while, but we haven't necessarily had like numbers to back that. So, for leftovers, I think from this study, you're showing that homes that don't use leftovers have almost 4 times the waste of those that do. Or if you put it another way, households that use their leftovers have a quarter of the waste of those that don't. And then for date labels, they typically households that typically throw food out on the date or at or past the date waste twice as much as those that don't. So I thought that was fascinating. And you already raised those as kind of the 2 behaviors that really rose to the top from this study. But I guess I'm curious, if one of them is 4 times and one of them is 2 times, does that mean like should we be prioritizing promoting leftover use over date labels because it has like a bigger impact? Can we say that from the way the study was done? This is for either of you to answer.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'd say that generally, what these results are highlighting are that both are important. I think that if we're looking at, for example, the amount being wasted by individuals who are here on that behavior versus this behavior, that is not necessarily taking into account another factor. So that's focusing specifically on people who responded this way or that way to a certain question. So the way that we were looking at these findings, generally what that's highlighting is both tend to be important factors. And I think potentially a more general thing that we're seeing is that, and you had mentioned this too, there tends to be a gap between people's attitudes and their behaviors. So 60% of people report feeling guilty when they throw away food. People tend to be very interested in the environment, but those individuals also tend to be reporting more food waste. And so people are feeling guilty, they want to do something and they want to save their money, but they're still producing food. And so there's the gap between how people are feeling and then what they're actually doing. And in terms of addressing that gap and helping people, focusing on behaviors and highlighting ones that are actually doable and tangible in someone's daily life, like for example, the date labels that are on most every food, and helping people tease out what that means. If it's past, they just throw it out immediately without thinking about it, or is one date label, does it mean something different than something else? So basically arming people with that kind of knowledge and empowering people to actually, for example, use their leftovers in other meals. And what do you do with food when it is past its due date and looking wilty, but it might still be fine? Can you do something with that might prevent waste? So those are 2 behaviors that we found that were really seem to be very important, and could potentially help to empower people to actually take a road from how they're feeling about food waste and carry it through to actually how much waste they are producing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is, can the numbers in here be used like maybe to help provide some of that motivation? So like, let's say we have somebody from a city on the call who has a campaign already that they're communicating with people in their community. Could they say, hey, did you know that using leftovers, like eating leftovers, can actually reduce your waste by 75% or something like that? I mean, would that be an accurate thing to say using your findings or according to this study, blah, blah, blah?
It would be an accurate statement, not only eating the leftovers, but using the leftovers creatively to make, say, another meal. And it would be maybe it might be a fun addition, in my view, to a training program. Like, hey, this is how you can use your French fries from yesterday. You can make an omelet with them, and actually my kids really love them, like French fries omelet. So the other thing is, when we are shifting to this behavior change work this year, there is the data is very rich, and these are what you see in the report. Took a lot of time to analyze, but there is even more analysis to be done. We don't need to choose emphasizing the date label behavior versus leftover use behavior, but we need to understand where those behaviors are more prevalent and emphasize them depending on what subpopulation we want to educate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. I think getting specific, right? Because we have
Yes.
different food habits. And I've seen various approaches to how you identify those subpopulations. It's not just demographics. It's very much, adventurous eaters, not adventurous eaters, people who are fearful of food, and other dynamics for sure. Before we leave behaviors, I want to talk about two more that came up in the report. One is shopping lists. So I saw that you showed in your intro slides that people don't always stick to their shopping lists. But what did you find? Did it have an impact on waste when they did?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was one of those factors that did predict food waste above and beyond everything else. Balca, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to?
Yeah, we have a slide that people who stick with the shopping list waste less. So making a shopping list is not significantly related to food waste, but sticking with it is. And that's another nice intervention idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are shopping list apps. So after people make their shopping list, those apps, I don't know if I've never used one, but do they send reminders? Hey, you made this shopping list. Are you using it? It could be a very easy prompt to remind people.
Well, I don't know if it's having the list or the behavior of walking through the store, right? This is a very old statistic, but it used to be that 55% of purchases in a store were unplanned, right? And so it's not so, you might have your list, but when you walk by the new flavor of popcorn, you're like, no, I'll just take that. And then you forget, well, nobody wastes popcorn, come on, but except at the movie theater. But whatever it is, something's on sale, they entice you, you buy it, and you don't have a plan because it's not in your plan, because it's not in your shopping list. So I noticed there was a minor, actually, the difference in using even for those who stick to it was not as significant as the leftover behavior. I was also interested in freezing, because that is a behavior that I promote a lot. I always say a freezer is it's like a magic pause button on your food. Although I've seen some studies that have found that frozen foods are actually thrown away almost like one of the top categories, because I assume because things get lost in the freezer. But I was excited to see that in this study, about 69% of households said that they freeze food before it goes bad. Did you guys get any more detail on that behavior at all?
I don't think so, no. We had looked at a few different, so one of the things, and I'm sure this is reflected in the chat, there are so many different factors that we can dive into in detail. And so here with leftovers, we were only able to include a few kind of general behaviors that people do rather than specific strategies. So we were focusing more so on people's whether they were using leftovers in future meals or whether they were prioritizing leftovers and stuff like that. So we weren't able to look at those specific strategies in as much detail. But yeah.
Got it. Okay. I think one or two more questions here, and then we will move to the Q&A. I see tons of questions coming in, so thanks everyone. Keep them coming. Back to the attitudes. This was the first time I have seen that food waste at 34%. So this was, I think the question was around concerns around food or something like that. And this was the first time that food waste ranked as a higher concern at 34% than food poisoning or food safety at 26%. And that was quite surprising for me. We've seen that in other countries like the UK, but I had not seen that result here before. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that from what you saw.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so one of the things we were interested in is in this kind of, general space. There's a lot of things to be concerned about. What would people say worries them? What are the concerns they're interested in? And again, their food prices came out huge. And like you said, food waste, being generally concerned about how much food is being wasted, that did rank above actually a lot of different things. It was the third highest, ranked as the concern people were most interested in. And it was above food poisoning. And also, interestingly enough, at the very bottom of that list was the impact of food production on the environment. So it's interesting how people are kind of thinking about these issues. And again, generally, there's somewhat of a divide of what people say. So here, for example, they're more interested in food waste than in food poisoning. But generally with date labels and another factor we found that people who were really concerned about the health risk of eating food that might have gone bad or gone off, that was a major factor in producing more food waste. So even though people generally tend to be less concerned, at least report that they're less concerned, when we're looking at everything together, still those kinds of behaviors and attitudes about what food is good to eat, when it's still good to eat, they still do play a factor in how much food waste is being produced. So that's another interesting issue where we're potentially seeing awareness shift, but that same underlying factor seems to still be something that's relevant to how much food is being wasted.
Got it. Interesting. One other thing I want to point out on the attitudes and concern side of things is that I think I saw that 53% of households feel empowered to change. Like they feel like they can reduce the amount of food that they waste, which I loved seeing. With that, I want to turn to some of the audience questions here because we have many that I apologize in advance. There's no way we could get to all of them, but I see a few coming in around composting and sewer kind of stuff going down the drain. And so I guess to put them together here, did you account for kind of what went down the drain, what went into compost? And was that like, if so, do you know how many participants were actively composting and was that being considered waste or not waste?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of, so again, with the survey, we were prevented by getting too specific because of how much we wanted to ask about. But the other thing was, because we were asking people, how much food did you throw out over the past week? It would be challenging to ask people what percentage of that food was thrown out through compost, down your drain, if you have a disposal, or just in the bin, or if you fed it to your animal. So we were able to get more specific with those kinds of things about the actual waste itself and the trends there in the app. So in that subset, around 300, 250 people, we asked people for each item that they reported wasting, whether they threw it out in the waste bin or in the compost, or to their animal or to down the drain. And around 18% of the food that was reported as being wasted over a week in the app, about 18% was composted food, was reported as being thrown out to the compost. Around 67% was wasted in just the landfill into your garbage. But so that was kind of the breakdown of food, at least in the app. Again, it's a smaller sample, but about 18% was being composted.
Got it. Okay, great. Balca, there's some kind of process questions about how this was done. One is, what are the learnings about the Bluetooth scales? Like, were they actually helpful in the research and did people use them correctly?
John actually wrote a paper about it. I'm gonna let him take
All right.
that.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do, part of, so we had given people these Bluetooth scales and they could just keep them. And we gave them a training period of how to actually use them. The Bluetooth scale was set up to connect directly to the food waste tracker app, so that all you needed to do was say, okay, I'm throwing something out, and start the process, and then weigh it, and it would populate kind of your app with how much food was being thrown out. If it didn't work, there was a way to manually do it. But we did find that for the most part, people were able to use the Bluetooth functionality and the scale. And again, that was a really important aspect of the study, because we wanted to see if you take food and ask someone how much you throw out, and then ask them to weigh every single thing, there are many reasons to expect those numbers to be completely different. It's hard to remember. It's also hard to estimate volume of something when, like, a cup of flour might weigh something very different each time you take a cup of flour, and certain other factors as well. And so we wanted to find whether they converged or not. And generally they did. But again, like I said earlier, it's not exact overlap. But yeah, so that's kind of the use of the Bluetooth scale. And generally it did work well. We were able to capture food waste in that way. But yeah.
Got it. And you did measure stuff that went down the drain, right? There's a question here about that. And then also the milk, and that you did include milk and liquids, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I thought so. All right. There are two interesting questions here. Well, one, I'll just combine them, although they're a little bit different. Did households with children waste more? Well, there's three. I'm going to put them all out. You can answer what you want. Did households with children waste more? Did less affluent households waste more? I think we did hear that those with higher incomes showed more waste than those with lower incomes. But specifically, they're asking about particularly minority populations. Did you learn anything about that? And also, did you find that time was a barrier? Were there any questions around time, since sometimes some of these solutions require extra time?
So first off, yes, households that had children reported wasting more than households without. I forget the exact numbers off the top of my head. I think we do get into it in the report, but simply having children at home or not was something where even if you're taking into account household size, those households tend to be wasting more. And then the other fact, so ethnicity, I believe, I'm not sure whether we had talked about this in the report, but I believe that I ran a lot of analyses, and anyone else can too. But I believe I looked at the differences in waste amounts between different racial groups, and I don't believe there was a significant difference across them. Again, I don't remember exactly, but I don't believe there was one. And then in terms of income, yeah, generally the higher households with higher income tended to be wasting more food. I forget exactly what the question was there, but
that's fine. And what about time? Did you guys ask about people's available time, or if time was a barrier or anything around that?
Balca, do you want to? I don't believe we did.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
We did not. But
good
going
point, though.
back to the question about households with children, they don't differ in terms of leftover use, but households with children are more concerned about date label dates. So there could be some mediation analysis to be done there, whether concern about past date labels is a mediator between having children and wasting more.
Mm. All right, this is a little bit of a different question, but there's one that's just asking, would policy help here? And so I'm curious, after doing all this, and you guys have done a lot of work with the government, did any types of policies come to mind that you think would be helpful?
We are actually in the process of replicating our prior analyses. And then, we looked into the relationship between food waste policies, state label policies, and state food waste, but we had used municipal solid waste as a proxy for food waste in the absence of state level food waste estimates. We couldn't capture variations between states. So we are replicating those analyses. So stay tuned. Once we finalize the analyses, we will be able to speak more to that.
Mhm. Did you find differences in waste by state? Were there states that were wasting a lot or less? You want to talk about that for a minute? There's some great graphics in the report.
Yeah, so one of the things we were able to do was, because we had a nationally representative sample of a lot of people in different states, we were able to estimate how much waste was being produced for each state. And so we had used a modeling procedure to do that, but we did find pretty significant differences across all the states. We didn't do any analogies or anything, but just descriptively. And you can find this on the website where we go into this. And also you can find the state level estimates themselves. We did find differences. So I think some of the lowest wasting states were Wyoming, Maine, and Idaho. And then some of the highest wasting states were Illinois, Maryland, and Arkansas. And so one of the other things we wanted to look at was, for example, you might imagine waste differing between states, but why? And so we wanted to look at, for example, the people have different, we also modeled a couple of our survey questions about attitudes and behaviors, but there was almost no difference at the state level. Like you didn't see a big difference in what people were actually caring about or doing across the states, but you were seeing a difference in how much waste was being produced. So yeah, definitely some variance there as well.
Interesting. Well, I mean, in terms of things you wanted to do, maybe that's a good way to kind of close out here. We could go on. We've only gone to half of the 27 or plus questions that have been posted. So thank you all for being so actively engaged. And sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but maybe to close us out, kind of, are there next steps that you're going to do? Balca, you mentioned one, but that MITRE is going to do that you'd suggest others do, or kind of if there are other research questions that you kind of wish you had been able to get to, but maybe you couldn't, and you could plant those as seeds for some of our listeners here.
Thinking, but what we have not shared. The time question is interesting. Now that we know, for example, leftover use versus not use, or utilization, that not know what, then we can go to the root causes of the current behavior and attitudes that predict food waste. We know, for example, if you look at best by or best if used by and sell by date labels, and how much weight people give to those two different labels when deciding to waste food, you see that there is not a big difference. So people don't know the difference between the two. I mean, there is no difference, but this is the recommendation is that these two labels mean different things. Why don't people give the same weight? How we can address that? So again, for every attitude and behavior and knowledge we identified as a predictor of food waste, we can take one step back to look at the antecedents of those attitudes, behaviors, and then boundary conditions, so that we know, again, whom to target for interventions.
All right. Root causes is my summary of that, if I got it right, kind of. John, you final word here. We're at time, so.
No, I think there are so many different things that you can investigate here, and all these different factors that we pulled out There's many different ways those actually manifest in people's homes with different kinds of food and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of things that you can also look at in the data itself. So we have the app data as well as the survey data all on the website. So definitely feel free to take a look at that. And yeah, excited to see where people are going to go.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for doing this study, for being willing to come chat about it. And thanks to everyone who's joined us and spent your time learning about this with us. I'm excited. I think there's a lot to take away from this. Please go on their site and slice and dice the data in new ways and tell us what you found. And yeah, look forward to more content from us as time goes on. And just thanks to both of you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dana, and thank you to this great audience and great questions.
Super. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.